I've spent a lot of time in research. My role in this particular area has changed over time to one where I am now very comfortable talking without data. I'm not nearly as comfortable talking without PowerPoint slides, but what I'm going to try to talk to you about today is the fact that we have a rapidly changing environment. As a pharmaceutical company, we are, oh boy, that's going to be a lot. We are beholden to our stakeholders, and our stakeholders are not only our shareholders. Our stakeholders are the veterinarians and producers that use our products. Our stakeholders are the retail companies that are the downstream users of the raw materials called the meat and milk. And ultimately to the consumer, who is the one who ultimately is responsible for all of that working. As we've heard, and I'll kind of talk about some things now so that when the slides come up I can just zip through them. We live in an environment that's ubiquitous with microorganisms. As we came in from a variety of locations, we have now commingled our own microorganisms one with the other, and it would be interesting to see as we go home how many of us break with some kind of respiratory disease and send that on back to our locations. It is ubiquitous. We are around microorganisms. They will always be in that case. The balancing act is how do we deal with the need for antimicrobials in animal health and preserve their efficacy, and how do we manage that with the balance of needing to have antimicrobials that are used in human medicine and preserving their efficacy. That is the critical point. That's essentially what we are all here about. And we do come with our different values about how to do that. We come with a lot of data. Interestingly enough, in this area of antimicrobial resistance and understanding how it works, it's probably the least clear of the science that I have ever been a part of. The same data set we could put up here, and I'll bet we'd come up with 187 different interpretations of the same data and what it means. So that's the difficulty we have with this, aside from dealing with technology. And so what we have to do is figure out what is going to be happening. And my job in R&D is to not only figure out what's happening now, but figure out how it might happen in the future so that we can be in the business of developing new antimicrobials or new interventions for infectious disease, maybe not antimicrobials, that will be of benefit to the animal producers and still preserve public health. And so in the slides that may or may not be shown, I'll talk a little bit about the changing marketplace. I'll talk about that, and then I'll put that in the context of what it takes to get a product approved, the cost, the time, and so forth. And then we'll try to put that together in terms of what the consequences of those are and what some of the potential go-forward strategies are. We're getting close. All right, so I want to give you just a quick update. This is really focused on the United States, but I'm going to give you a bit of information that I just got this morning from my European colleagues. So you hear a lot about Denmark, you hear a lot about the Netherlands, you hear a lot about what's happening in Europe. Let me give you a quick update. The Dutch health ministers in early August proposed a ban on all beta-lactams, all fluoroquinolones, all macrolides, all aminoglycosides for use in livestock. Period. That Dutch health minister has been working in the Dutch parliament. That is now passed. That is happening in the Netherlands. You might ask the question, what's left? Fluorphenicol, tetracyclines, trimethylene sulfate. Now, the other part that is going on in the Dutch area is the health ministers have declared that the animal use of antimicrobials will decrease by 50% by the year 2013 or 2014. I'm not sure today. Oh, good. Wow, that's not. So to finish the story before I get started here, What is the number one antimicrobial used in Denmark? Anybody have an idea? Tetracyclines. So they have banned all the other antimicrobials, and they've declared they want to have a 50% reduction on the antimicrobial usage in general, which really is going to hit tetracyclines. So now the question is, what are the producers going to do? What are the veterinarians going to use in the future? Those are some of the things that are happening and that happens just since August. That's the kind of rapidly changing environment that we're dealing with, and will set us up for some of this discussion. All right, I'm going to zip through here now quickly. You know that. You know that. And you know that we have strong agreement that there's one health, that we have to think about what's best for both animals and people. Some comments on resistance. All antibiotics select for resistance. You look for it, you can find it. Number 2, antibiotics in animal health are just like all antibiotics. So antibiotic resistance poses a risk to both human and animal health. Those are, in my view, immutable facts. There are many factors that contribute to the emergence and dissemination of antibiotic resistance. The difficulty is no one can really figure out what's that attributable risk. That ends up being the value judgment that we wrestle with. So, go back to the market. The animal health industry in 2010, according to the International Federation of Animal Health, the Association of Animal Health Associations, website, says that the animal health sales was roughly $20.1 billion in 2010. When you can see the growth and you can see the split between companion animal and livestock, just to give you a context, Pfizer Inc. has just recently lost patent protection on a product that you might be aware of, many of you may take, called Lipitor, which sells $10 billion on its own. The entire animal health business globally is only twice that. The antimicrobials component of that business is about $3 billion. I might be off by a couple of $100 million. But suffice it to say that it is about that particular percentage. It's in the range of probably 15%, maybe a little bit more, of the global animal health sales. You've heard about this. This is essentially the pharmacokineticist view of what clinical microbiologists have put in a really complicated version. And it's essentially talking about the release assessment, the exposure assessment, consequence assessment, leading on to what I'll talk about probably more, which is what does FDA do with all of this? Well, FDA can essentially say, we're going to deny the product. We're going to not allow that product to be on the market. We probably will have had conversations with them before that time so we know when to cut our losses. So that happens very rarely. There can be FDA approval under specific use conditions which are intended to restrict the use of the antimicrobial to the specific situations that they think are most prudent or most judicious. Prescription only, no extra label drug use, no preventative use, no whole herd or whole flock use. It could be a limit on duration, it could be a limit on the method of administration, and there can be, and there have been, veterinary medicine advisory committees review these information to help the agency be better informed about what experts believe is appropriate. All of these are intended to limit or restrict use. I actually like that approach. I think it's a good approach. I think it makes sense. We can argue about whether it's a qualitative or a quantitative risk assessment, but it, in my opinion, is at least based upon data and science. There are occasions where the precautionary principle prevails, and in Europe we hear about that. The law in Europe talks about what the precautionary principle is. I kind of paraphrased it this morning with one of my colleagues, and it's saying, did you end up not doing something if you're not sure what's going on? And essentially it is a decision to take action without waiting until all the necessary scientific knowledge is available. My question is there ever complete scientific knowledge? We certainly can talk today, and I think we would all agree that there is incomplete knowledge in this particular area. So in some respects, the precautionary principle in Europe could be applied almost with any scientific situation, because science is never complete. The other part that's listed under precautionary principle is a piece that talks about it being proportional to the risk. That's the big piece that I think is of really importance in Europe. So the action, the measures need to be proportional to the risk. Well, I thought to myself, if the risk is antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial failures in human medicine caused by resistant organisms, does animal health have a part of that to play? Yes, I think we do. It's our responsibility. It's also human health's responsibility. Dr. Flam talked about that yesterday. What's proportional about the measures taken to reduce that risk of antimicrobial resistant diseases in humans? Is there a proportional risk between animal health and human health? Quite honestly, I think in many instances within animal health and the agriculture industry, we don't even know what those mitigating factors are, what those precautions are being taken in Europe. But I think that there's that kind of dialogue that needs to take place on what is the appropriate proportion of measures for the animal industry versus the appropriate proportion of measures for the human health industry. Just a little bit more on bans of antibiotic growth promoters in feed. In Korea, they discontinued antibiotics in feed. That essentially did a lot to reducing the antimicrobial use as a growth promoter. But then the European Union started that in 99. It went through a phased portion until 2006. It was a complete ban. Switzerland did it in 99, Denmark 98, Sweden in 86. So you can see that there have been places that have made these abrupt changes and decisions as in many respects, and many people would say as a precautionary principle. What about what's happening now? Well, the U.S., we talked about the Baytril water-soluble approval revoked by FDA in 2005. EU label restrictions on first-line therapy. In Europe now, on labels of approved products, it will tell the veterinarian not to be used as the first-line therapy only after there is proof that a prior first-line therapy did not work. All right? So sort of setting it aside to be a backup. I think there's some rationale for that. The question that is tough is to know what is necessary for the veterinarian to have to be able to make that determination that the first-line therapy didn't work. Do you have to dose the animal and have them fail first and then treat? Is it a prevalence of resistance of that particular first-line therapy? And then looking at the population and moving in that direction. Those are the questions that are left unanswered. I mentioned the Netherlands issue, what's proposed. I would tell you that just as a follow-on to that comment about the Netherlands, the European Parliament had a resolution that was put forward to them in about the end of August by the Dutch Ministers of Parliament through the Environmental Committee there. And it had several things included. One was a recommendation to prohibit any new classes of antibiotics or any new antibiotics from being used in animals, period. You catch that? You get a sense of what happens? We essentially would be stopping with what tools we have in the toolbox right now. The resistant organisms would march on, and those tools would stay static. That was one of their recommendations. The other one was a ban on certain classes of antimicrobials. I will tell you, the good news is that this morning, that resolution was amended to eliminate those two particular topics. It was passed by the European Parliament, but was passed without those amendments being in place. In the U.S., there are several legislative actions that have been proposed. PAMTA is one of them that would eliminate growth promotion, prevention, and control claims for premix and water-soluble products unless the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary determines that they're safe, and that would essentially be a review by the Food and Drug Administration. It defines critically important antimicrobials a little differently than others have, and we talked about defining Bob Veal, defining therapeutic claims. Every definition that's different creates a little more confusion. That is something that has been proposed. That's not gotten out of committee, as I understand it. At this point, it's still one that gets proposed. I think it's been proposed the last 2 or 3 years. There are pending extra-label drug use restrictions and prohibitions that have been proposed. I know that in 2009 there was the cephalosporin proposed extra-label drug use prohibition that went back to the agency. I know that FDA is involved with that, and I think one of the ones who's been intimately involved with that, Dr. Flynn, is here, and I'll let him address that if he wants to. There is also in the U.S., the Guidance 209, which is the proposed elimination of growth-promoting indications for medically important antibiotics. That will be followed. That's sort of a philosophical guideline that will be followed if it's implemented with another guideline that will tell us how that's actually to be done. So, what is and the EU is likely to expand its focus. The European president in 2012 is Danish. What is their agenda? Antibiotic resistance. Their interest in the common EU surveillance program, their goal to reduce antibiotic consumption among both humans and animals with a focus on critically important antibiotics. And the one, if I will, the one glimmer of hope is the potential incentives for R&D to expand the available options. Again, for human medicine or for animal medicine, if we stop in the antibiotic development business, we will end up with ineffective antimicrobials. So the goal is to try to find those ways to perpetuate the R&D. And the question is, how do you do that in the kind of market situation that we are living in right now? There's some other market-limiting factors, the preference for holding new antibiotics in reserve, and formularies that serve to direct veterinarians which products to use. I think all of these will kind of give you a sense that the marketplace for antimicrobials is shrinking. Now, should it shrink? That's a value judgment, but it's certainly there are certain uses of antimicrobials that are not judicious, that are not prudent. But from a business standpoint, here we are looking at a marketplace that is shrinking. It's shrinking because of extra-label drug use restrictions. It's shrinking because of EU bans. It's shrinking because of other activities or other factors that are taking place. And so ultimately, we will have a marketplace for antimicrobials that will not be the size that has driven the current R&D investment. So what is the current R&D investment? Well, currently, for animal health antibiotics, it's approximately 10 years from the time you discover something and $100 million before it actually gets out of the market. That takes care of the things that fail, that you have to go back and find another one, but it's essentially 10 years, $100 million. Now, I want you to think about putting $100 million of your own money in the bank for 10 years. And ask yourself what kind of return on investment you'd like to have. That's what we have to think about when we're in the business of R&D. So here's the global marketplace, $3 billion in 2008. It's not increasing. If you look at the segmentation, if anything, the antimicrobials market is shrinking. And it will continue to if you have actions like what's happening in Europe. There is consolidation, which means less internal antibiotic expertise that's available, similar to what's in human pharma. And I'll show a slide that I think Dr. Flam talked about a little bit in a second here. Most current new veterinary antibiotics were discovered in the 1980s. Most came from human discovery programs. There are very few animal health companies that can actually justify the discovery model of developing from scratch their own antimicrobials. It's an expensive process. And we're now seeking external opportunities. Internal business competition versus non-antibiotic candidates. It's exactly like what's happening on the human health side, where the human health side is focusing more on chronic diseases that have a more long-standing return on investment than antimicrobials. Here's something we got out of Dr. Bush out of Indiana University. This is kind of the history of what's happening on the human health side. The left-hand side of the slide shows how many pharmaceutical companies in 1980 were focusing on human health antimicrobials. 1998 is the top right quadrant. 2010 is the bottom right quadrant. That's human health. That's human health. pipeline slowing as well. Dr. Flam talked a lot about that, and it can be mirrored exactly in the animal health business from what's happening on the human health side. You've seen this classes of antimicrobials. Dr. Shryock showed this one. Why are antibiotics used in both humans and animals? Well, pathogens are comparable in many instances. There's gram-positive, gram-negatives. Both of them infect people and animals. We're all mammals. The R&D is typically driven from humans, and so animals tend to be secondary yet important beneficiaries of that R&D investment. And you see there the potential risks for sharing and the potential risks cited for not sharing, and I'll just leave you looking at those particular components. The WHO critically important list criteria talks about a couple of things, and you've probably heard about those things on the human health side. I'm not going to bore you with that, but I'm going to just show to you that here's the list of critically important antibiotics on the human health side on the left side of the screen, and those that were deemed by the essentially the WHO for animal health, the OIE. What's critically important on the animal side, on the right-hand side? There's a whole lot of overlap. So we are left continuing to have that conundrum of having similar antibiotics being needed both sides. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but I want you just to get the sense that that $100 million is a long-term investment. It's not only early, it's not only late, it is all the way through the process. And to be honest, most of the investment is expended 2 to 3 years before the product is approved. That last period of time is getting the files put together, getting them submitted to the agency, waiting for the agency response, providing responses back to the agency. So most of that $10 million investment is in the first 2/3 of that time. We have to make good decisions early. So what might a new antibiotic look like for animal health? Well, okay, let's say it's non-human antimicrobial classes. All right, low potential for later development for human use. Sounds good. Oh, I just heard about colistin. There's that risk. It might be that we make that choice based upon this criteria, and all of a sudden, the research on the human side moves along to where now they've figured out how to work around the problem on the human health side. Narrow spectrum versus broad spectrum. Well, that affects the market size, that affects the value of that investment. Bactericidal mechanism preferred to bacteriostatic. Okay, minimizing co-resistance and cross-resistance. We are working on that now. We work with JMI, we work with other companies, with diagnostic labs like Dr. Fales' lab, to figure out what's co-resistant, what's cross-resistant, because that is an important, that is a factor we already include in that. Parenteral route preferred when possible, but we recognize that's probably not likely or feasible when you're talking about billions of broilers. Appropriate label directions to guide the end user in the use of the product to ensure minimal or no foodborne bacteria-resistant selection. Well, if you think about all those criteria, it gets to be a little bit of a narrow target. The bullseye has shrunk on what we're trying to shoot for. We also need to have susceptibility testing methods, breakpoints. We work with CLSI to get those done. Diagnostic methods, ensuring that the clinical disease is what is appropriate. And we know that we're not treating a disease that would not be amenable to antimicrobial therapy. Think about off-label use restrictions. Those are all things that are playing into the way we are thinking about developing products in the future. So what are the consequences? I hope I've helped you recognize the picture of increased time and cost and reduced market size. It's exactly the same situation that they're facing for antimicrobials in human health. I see Dr. Fleming shaking his head. It is exactly the same. There is no difference in that dilemma. So how do we deal with it? Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are the consequences that we intend to have with our actions, and what are some of the unintended consequences as well that might occur? And these are all conjectures, so these are not based upon data, these are just based upon the gospel according to Brown. First of all, precious antibiotics saved for use in humans only. Okay, that might be an intended consequence. Alleged reduction in selective pressure for medically important antibiotics. Okay, alleged reduction in selective pressure for MDR, plasmids, and pathogens. Those are all the intended consequences of those actions. What might occur? I don't know. If I knew what was going to occur, I wouldn't be doing this, I'd be in the stock market. But widespread off-label or illegal use may occur. Black marketing of products is a big deal in human health. It could be a big deal in animal health. Intense use of a very few classes of antibiotics. I wonder what that will do to resistance when it's an intense use of a few antimicrobials. Major animal disease may be left untreated or untreatable. Increase in animal morbidity and mortality. Human health or food safety may be jeopardized. We've talked about that and seen the link between animal health and human health. And certainly a reduced incentive to develop new antimicrobials. Now, I'm going to be the first to say that I'm not saying all those are going to occur, are likely to occur, anything like that. I'm just raising the question. Do we think about the unintended consequences when we take action? Right now, the big thrust is on non-antibiotic interventions. How do we take care of the animal diseases with immunomodulatory compounds, with phage therapy, carcass treatment, non-antibiotic performance products, microorganism-based products like probiotics, nutraceuticals, vaccines, novel concept, virulence or quorum sensing blockers, disease-resistant animal breeds, other approaches. Heard somebody talking last month about the genetic engineering of the pig in China. And they're spending something like, I want to say $3 billion on genetic engineering of the pig in over 10 years so that they will be disease resistant. It's not just by breeding, it's by genetic engineering. So a genetically modified pig to be resistant. All right. So those are the kind of alternatives that are being considered now. What do we do about new antibiotics for human use, and would that apply to animal health? Well, there's an interesting debate going on now on Capitol Hill about extending patent life or regulatory exclusivity for antimicrobials on the human health side so that there is the ability to have that R&D investment be recouped over a longer period of time. Might be interesting to think about that for animal health as well. Research credits for antibiotic investment, public-private partnerships, price considerations. And I'll just throw out this one question about how does the marketplace change when the price of an antimicrobial drops because of generic competition? Does use change? According to the generic drug law, use doesn't change. So should these incentives, or will those incentives, include animal use antibiotics? I think it's an important consideration given that we have the same difficulties in the human health side and animal health side in developing new antimicrobials. It would be great. I have to say I have borrowed a lot of these slides from Tom Shryak, so I'm going to give him credit for that. There's one health incentive should be considered. Researchers that would discover novel anti-infectives would then consider the potential for human health use and animal health use at the same time, collaborating to find the best ways to use antibiotics with thinking about the one health in mind, human health sector, animal health sector. So with that, I'll just summarize. Hopefully you've recognized, even though I haven't explicitly said it, antibiotics are the only product category where increased use theoretically promotes more rapid obsolescence. The changing global landscape of antibiotic use restrictions has undermined the value of new product development. The speed of change in the regulatory and political landscape has been enormously faster than the product development landscape. And the results of these actions are going to change what's going to be available over the next 10 to 15 years. So I typically am a glass half full kind of guy. I feel like I've had a hole poked in my styrofoam cup and the water's running out. But I think this is a call to action, and I really appreciate the opportunity in this forum to be able to say it's time to begin to act in a way that will think about the future over the next 10 to 15 years. Thank you.